everyone, and welcome once again to the shocking Comic Book Vault. I'm Captain Logan.
And I'm Dan.
Dan, what are we reviewing today, man?
Today we're taking a look at a shocking good series. This is Spider-Man 2099, by Peter David and mostly Rick Leonardi. There's a fill-in artist here with one issue. But we're taking a look at the first 10 issues today. This is from 1994, I think?
92!
92. So
this was
my existence.
It does. And I was like 8. And I remember when this came out, and this was going on during what I remember for my childhood as the big heyday golden age of comics. Now, it wasn't exactly that, but for for me, this is the period I am most nostalgic for. The Death of Superman was just happening during this, and this was just before Spawn happened, or just around then. So, we are doing this in honor of Peter David's relaunch of Spider-Man 2099, which just came out this week, and I've read this, I'll be reviewing this on the show this week. I actually don't know which video will come up before which video, but anyway, so I thought it would be really cool if we went through all of Spider-Man 2099 in a series, and we're going to start with the first 10 issues, which is also the way that they're collecting it in trade. They're doing it in 10-issue chunks. So, if you have the trade, we'll be reviewing basically that trade. But it is fun, Dan, to go back to these in singles and look at all the ads from the time and all that kind of stuff. And of course, like you said, this predates you. That is still wiggy in my brain. But so you weren't alive yet. I of course remember a lot of the stuff that's being, especially video games and stuff that are being advertised in these books. And I remember a lot of these ads, even just from the time, because like I said, this was the period that got me in the comic books. So Dan, what was your first impression of this? Just getting straight into it.
The first 3 issues of this book is kind of like the origin of the character, and I remember the first time I read through these not being particularly impressed, and I was surprised because Peter David's a writer that I absolutely love. He's one of my favorite writers ever to work in comics. He's fantastic. And I think if you read this as a 10-issue chunk, it's a really good introduction, not just to this character, but the world that Peter David sets him in, because Peter David's such a smart writer in that he takes like the basic tenets of who Peter Parker is and applies them to this guy, but they all come from different places. Like, Peter Parker's, like, in the beginning, an antisocial kind of, like, kid because nobody gives him the time of day in his social life. And here, Miguel O'Hara's an antisocial kind of guy, and he quips at people because he's arrogant. But that's because he had a terrible upbringing, which is the opposite of Peter Parker, but he's similar to him because of a completely different reason. So you get around to, like, all these classic character traits that you want Spider-Man to be, but he has, like, different character facets, and that's all informed by this corporatist, like, dystopian world that he lives in. And it's really interesting if reading through those. So that was my initial impression and vested interest in the book, I think, was all of that stuff, the world building, and coming at, like, this Spider-Man character from a completely different angle that I had never seen before.
When Miguel O'Hara first hears the phrase "with great power comes great responsibility," which, by the way, I thought kind of came from a lame place. I kind of wished that somehow or rather that had been related to the original Spider-Man, but whatever. So that just kind of comes out of nowhere. And when he hears it, he calls it basically fortune cookie nonsense. And what I think is really interesting about that, and then later on he even brings it back and says, well, actually, that's totally wrong. With great power comes great guilt. And when you look at Peter Parker, that's always been true. That responsibility is always accompanied with guilt. It's like no matter what I do, there are always consequences to every action I make. So even when I do what I think is the right thing, I still oftentimes feel guilty because of the negative consequences. I can't win. And I think Miguel O'Hara is experiencing that same thing in this. But and I think that he also, to his core, like deep down, I think he agrees with that message. I think he does agree with great power comes great responsibility, but he resists it because it's not the world he lives in.
Yeah, personal responsibility is kind of dead in this world, which is interesting. And I was looking at this from an interesting angle too, living in the time that we live in, and I think it's sort of interesting how corporatism is a problem that America has dealt with as a society throughout its history. But I think right now, especially, it's causing a lot of problems, especially in our political system. And everything's completely privatized here, and you see sort of attitudes where no one's willing to compromise about anything. Like the Vulture in here brings that up. He said, compromising with someone who doesn't agree with you about everything, that's a foreign concept to people in this world. And I don't know. I just think I don't know if, like, in 1992, that's what the world was like too. I don't, from what I've read in history, like, at least politics weren't as gridlocked as they are right now. But like Peter David was thinking ahead, and like, I don't know, like he got some things right, like within our society, like problems that we have, and applies them to this like future world. And the best science fiction things do that, and that's what I really appreciate about it, you know?
Yeah, there were a lot of things at this time that were looking at even the corporate politics and just and with relation to, you know, government at the time, and trying to extrapolate the problems that could happen in the future. I got somewhat of a Demolition Man vibe from this. And so I think that in the 90s it was maybe and I don't mean to be cynical when I say this, but I think it was a little bit more fun to do that because it seemed more extreme. And I think you read this 24 years later, 22 years later, and it doesn't seem quite as extreme as it did at the time. I can kind of see where this felt over the top and kind of quirky in you know there's this very Big Brother kind of thing, of course, in this, and you would expect that. There's a lot of typical future stuff in this that you would kind of expect you know, Peter David to do, and there's some 1984 stuff, but then you're thinking about it now and you're like, you know, you with science fiction, a lot of the time what you do is you take something and you exaggerate it and you dramatize it to its furthest, craziest degree, and then you use that in order to kind of reveal subtle problems in your society. But when you go back to something like this and those problems don't feel as subtle as they did back then, it's a little bit harder to read. I found I enjoyed this, but I also found it to be a little bit depressing. And I don't think I would have found it as depressing in 1992.
Yeah, I agree. I kind of had sort of the same thing, like even, you know, all the talk about private armies and, like, you know, corporations just battling each other. And, like, the exaggeration is still there. Like, yeah, I don't know if we'll get what happened to the American government in here, but they don't seem to exist, at least not yet. I mean, like, Alchemax owns, like, the police and entire cities in this. And, like, they're not even, like, secret about it. Like, they go to indie cities, which are, like, independently owned by citizens that aren't, like, giant corporations like Alchemax and stuff like that. So it'll be interesting to see, like, how this world is further built. But I think, like, it's interesting to see a Spider-Man. Of course, Peter Parker's a guy that, like, is always down on his luck and stuff like that, but he's always sort of optimistic because he had a good upbringing. But this one doesn't, and he lived in that corporate structure that's so cutthroat, and, like, they don't give anybody a chance. If they make a mistake, they're not allowed. Like, we see the head of Alchemax here just straight up, like, destroy somebody's life because he made one mistake, and it was really a miscommunication that wasn't his fault.
Yeah.
So that's, like, I like that this world informs so much about who this guy is and what his outlook on the world is, and how he wants to change it. That's the hopeful thing that I'm able to come out of here.
Miguel O'Hara is a product of his upbringing, and I like that the Vulture brings up. The Vulture psychoanalyzes Spider-Man a lot, and you learn a lot about him just from, which is weird because you're learning about it from this very demented person who's completely insane, and he's a cannibal, and it's terrifying. But then there's grains of truth in everything he says, and so and by the way, this is going to sound maybe crazy to a lot of people because people don't like Peter David's villains. I like this Vulture more than the normal Vulture. I like
Peter David's written a great 616 Vulture.
Oh, so has he? Okay, cool.
I had no doubt that he would do it well here too.
I thought that the rest of the villains that we got in this were kind of bland, but I liked his Vulture.
The Vulture was definitely the best one, and we'll talk about what happens with him after, but go ahead.
Sorry, it's hard not to go everywhere right now, exactly, but yeah, because there's so much in this. 10 issues is quite a bit. But so he's psychoanalyzing Miguel O'Hara, and he says you can't help but be corporately minded. And it's interesting because Miguel O'Hara hates the corporation he works for. What he ultimately ends up doing with the Spider-Man persona is he's trying to use that to bring this whole corporation down. They're doing a lot of crimes against humanity. Stone, who runs the place, doesn't looks at people. If you haven't read this, looks at people as a means to an end, and anybody he can find a way to manipulate and especially objectify and use for his terrifying science experiments, he will do that to. And Miguel is too outspoken about how much he hates their crimes against humanity and the way that they don't look at people as people, and they go too far at the beginning of this in trying to use people as guinea pigs. And so he ends up. I really like what Stone does. He tries to keep Miguel from leaving by putting him on a drug and controlling him through addiction. And that's what leads him to ultimately doing the experiment that leads him to Spider-Man, because he's trying to cure himself. And so anyway, just a quick synopsis for people that haven't read this, but so it's interesting because he does think that he does have that corporate kind of mindset. He doesn't really he doesn't really appreciate people the way Peter Parker did, because he's been he's been brought up in this society that's incredibly cutthroat and where everything is corporations eat other corporations, and yet there's something just naturally at the core of him that says this is wrong, and he resists that. And so he's as anti-establishment as he can possibly be, and yet I think if Peter Parker met him, they would look at the world in two entirely different ways.
They would, and it's interesting that we're talking about all this anti-establishment corporatism kind of stuff, because I've always thought that's a theme that was very much in the background in Spider-Man, and it didn't have to be, seeing as his arch nemesis owns a corporation.
Yeah.
And Peter Parker's a teenager from the 1960s. Fighting against the establishment was what all kids were about back then.
Yep.
And his arch enemy was a big corporate dude, but he wasn't secret about the things he was doing. Obviously, He was insane and ran around in a goblin costume and tried to take over the criminal underworld. There's not much talk about the establishment versus the people and stuff like that. And that's what all this is about. I think that Peter David was very smart in coming at Spider-Man in addressing something that's always been there, but putting it more to the forefront with this new version of the character, this is not derivative of Spider-Man in that it's the same character, but it's familiar enough of a flavor where Peter David sold you you're reading a Spider-Man comic book set in the future. It's not a completely different dude just with the namesake. He feels like a Spider-Man-esque character in a Spider-Man-esque world, which I like a lot.
I also like, though, that he's not the opposite of Peter Parker. He's a different character. This could have been very easily, kind of gimmicky and obvious and simple about that, where it's let's have the exact opposite of Peter Parker. No, it wasn't like that. I also think that Peter David is incredibly thoughtful in realizing the future of the Marvel Universe at large. And I know that 2099, there were several books in, so I don't know how much of this he made up or how much of it was by committee. But the thing that I really like about this is that one of the things that made America fall apart was the end of the heroic age. Mm-hmm. And they talk about that a lot, and we need to at some point deal with the religious stuff in this, because first of all, the worshippers of Thor are freaking hilarious. And they remind me of present day religious fundamentalists, but it's supposed to be over the top and crazy and kooky, and in the same way you were talking about how it's depressing seeing things that are supposed to be like that actually happening in today's world. I was oh my god, this is crazy. So it's like heroes go away, and so then you get this very stone cold. There's a reason that guy's last name is Stone. Just like one of the main bad guys in Batman Beyond's last name was Powers, right? It's the same kind of thing. And by the way, I also want to compare this to Batman Beyond later, because it is in a lot of ways the same thing. And I mean, it's different, but they have a lot of similarities. Right. But you you get to this future, and heroes went away, and so people stopped believing in each other, and now it's just all about survival of the strongest, who has the most. I must oppress other people in order to even survive, and the class warfare stuff in this is depressing.
Yeah, it is. I mean, like, it reminds me of some of the attitudes that I've heard, in the corporate world. I won't talk specifics for the sake of time, but like Stone in this story, he talks a lot about how, it's not a lot. He just kind of snaps at one person when someone asks him, well, what about the interest of the public when he's trying to do something? Because, like, basically when you, like, this corporate system, the CEO, like, is the dictator of whichever property he owns, and these people are, like, his subjects. It's like a corporatist fascist kind of system. And he just kind of says to the guy, well, the interest of Alchemex is the public interest. And he's too far away from the people to realize how bad life is for them, or he just doesn't care.
And it's hard to tell. He does seem pretty stereotypical, two-dimensional, and I'm hoping that we see him fleshed out as it goes on. I feel like the last two issues, he does start to come alive a little bit more, and so it's going to be interesting to see if there is a human underneath that cold exterior.
Right.
But yeah, you're right about that. One of the lines that really kind of hit home for me was when he said, I think it's in the first issue, Stone... I'm trying to remember what it was now. Stone says something about, like, oh yeah, what the company wants. And Miguel says, well, companies aren't people. Companies... I think Miguel says...
Which is crazy, because the Supreme Court says that they are now. And it's insane.
Well, I don't mean... I try to not get political on this show whenever I can help it, but we're talking about things that are directly related to that, and what's happening right now is that we are seeing a lot of... Dan and I right now are seeing a lot of reality right now kind of playing out in this comic book, and it's weird because this was written 20 years ago. But yeah, so I think it's Miguel that's arguing with him, and he's like, corporation, people have motivations, people have feelings. So the idea, of course, is that a company can justify any heinous crimes against human beings they want to by saying it's just business, it's only business, and it's in the company's interest, and the company wants this, and for the company to survive, we have to make these kinds of moral compromises. And it's so easy to divorce yourself from the issues when you say that. You go, if it was just me, I agree with you. This is a horrible thing, and we shouldn't do that. We shouldn't experiment on people. But well, the company is God. And that's the thing, is that, when you get into the religion stuff with, like, Thor and stuff, if you think about it, it isn't like non-religious people versus crazy religious zealot. No, the majority of people in this, 99% of people in this, worship business.
Yes, they do. It's just kind of like worship of any sort of authority figure, right? Mm-hmm. That sort of thing. It's very interesting, like, seeing all of those parallels with real life and stuff. And that was kind of the stuff that I latched onto the most in the book, just having a background in this stuff. Like, that was the stuff that fascinated me the most. But I really liked a lot of the characters in this, especially, like, the love dynamic that Peter David sets up. Like, it's kind of a love triangle thing that he has with all these characters. Like, there's 4 characters. There's sort of, like, I forget her name, but his brother's Gabriel's girlfriend is sort of like this rebel free fighter, like, totally anti-establishment kind of girl, probably like a militant hippie kind of person.
Yeah, she's all real free spirit and all of that.
Yeah, exactly. And Miguel makes fun of him, as a matter of fact, for, like, all these things that she, like, convinced him of. And Gabriel seems like a kind of naive but idealistic kind of guy. He seems kind of similar to Peter Parker to me, which is interesting. And then you have, like, Dana, which is Miguel's girlfriend, and all of them have, like, spoken to each other, and, like, Gabriel's girlfriend has a crush on Spider-Man because he's so anti-establishment and fights the corporation,
but hates Miguel.
And Gabriel knows this, so he's mad at him. And Dana and Gabriel used to have a thing, so when Miguel is, like, neglecting her at some points because he's out being Spider-Man, she goes to him. So, like, the love dynamic's very complicated, and I like that these people feel like they have real reasons for liking these people. Like, even Gabriel's girlfriend, she has kind of a superficial reason for liking Spider-Man because he fights the establishment and he has a nice butt, apparently.
Cute,
that's what she likes about him. Which was, I thought it was mildly amusing, but I didn't really need that.
Yeah, I didn't need that.
But I don't know, like, I liked that the relationships weren't cut and dry like they weren't in the original Spider-Man books, you know? Like, he's playing with a lot of that stuff, like people getting together and not being right for each other. I want to see these relationships flesh out, and it seems like Dana is like the girl that stuck by Miguel when no one else has. Like, even it's kind of the reverse of what Peter Parker had, right? Like, his upbringing at home is terrible. Peter Parker was never able to get a girlfriend. But Miguel has this girl that's been with him this whole time and really loves him and sees the humanity in him, even when he doesn't. It's interesting, you know?
Yeah, that's a really good point, and that's a really stable relationship, so that she probably has a lot to do with what his current outlook on life is, and that weird confliction that he has with, well, the reality of life is this cutthroat corporate attitude, but then when I'm with her, I care about people, and it makes me care about people.
And it makes him look like sort of a hypocrite when he's making fun of his brother for his girlfriend influencing him so much, when Dana is having more of an effect on him than he realizes.
Remember that the Vulture brings up that hypocrisy, and it's the very thing you're talking about. Yes. And also, when we get to the end of this, Miguel himself begins to internal monologue about that very hypocrisy, and he's figuring it out. I like the identity issues in this. I've always been a big sucker for superheroes. Yeah, this is what I like. This is one of the big things I love about superheroes. One of the reasons that I'm so into the genre in the first place is the idea of identity and masks and who we are versus who we want to be, what we present, and what we're trying to create for ourselves. What Miguel does is he puts on the mask, and whenever he is Spider-Man, all of a sudden this other persona takes over. It's almost as if he's got multiple personalities. It's like this other
and Peter
other
Parker
thing.
had the same thing.
Yeah, and it's this other thing that takes over. But what's interesting is, and correct me if you think I'm wrong, because you know Spider-Man better than I do, and you know the early stuff better than I do. But the way I've always seen Peter Parker with Spider-Man is that Spider-Man is like Peter Parker has, like, you know, with his responsibility thing, he, without the mask, has that all figured out. Peter Parker goes, oh man, I tried to throw the costume in the trash can for the 35,000th time, but this horrible thing's happening that I have to go stop. And so he already is responsible without the costume. He doesn't need the costume to have understood that lesson and to be the person that he is. When he puts the costume on, it gives him strength. It gives him it makes him easier to cope with things. It's almost like that's where the kind of like confidence and excitability and just like, you know, free spirit, easy to deal with things comes from. Miguel, it's different. It's not the opposite, but it's different. With him, it's whenever I'm not wearing the costume, it's easier for me to have that kind of corporate mindset thing. He puts the costume on, and all of a sudden he's fighting for the people. He's a freedom fighter. It's almost as if somehow that altruism and that kind of idealism is like in the mask or something, you know? It's almost like he becomes who he wishes he could be in a different society whenever he puts that on. And I don't know, is it because people can't see his face? Is it because he doesn't have to look at himself in the mirror? You know, what is it?
That's a very interesting point, and I think that's maybe speaking to, like, people always say, well, the bigger the government or whatever figure of institution of authority rules a society, like the bigger it gets and the farther away it gets from the people, the less effective it gets at governing people, and they're not able to cater to the specific needs of the people. That's why, like, the American founders liked small government in the first place, because, like, you could hear the people's needs. It wouldn't be as corrupt, or at least you'd be corrupted by the businesses in the area, so there would be a larger net, like, benefit for the people. So Miguel, he's working with this big corporation. He's doing things that affect large amounts of people's lives, and he doesn't see them firsthand. So it doesn't affect him in the same way that being a Spider-Man, he goes out in these streets of downtown and sees the slums that these people are living in at the result of the corporation he works for. And he's like, well, like, I have a completely different perspective on all of this now. Now I see, like, how these people are living. And, like, they made, like, I don't know if they didn't specifically come out and say it, but they made it seem like that was the first time he'd ever been there, or at least been on the streets and talked to people in that area and interacted with them. And stuff,
I think very clearly that was the first time he'd ever done that. He seemed shocked by all of that.
Yeah, exactly.
Not to use that word too much in this review, but yeah. So you're right. Maybe what it is that when he puts the costume on and he goes, and it's not just wearing it, but I think the more he does it, it does become this kind of like identity thing where it's influencing how he sees himself, right? And so when he goes and saves people or sees these horrible ways people are living, it's almost as if the suit gives him an X-ray vision into what society really is, and so so those walls are being torn down. So he's got a comfortable wall when he's in Alchemax between him and all the horrible things that Alchemax is doing to people. He's got that. He's got a paycheck. He's got a nice apartment. He's got food on the table. That's another big distinction between him and Peter Parker, is that this horrible company that is ruling everything is giving him a really good living. He lives like a king, basically. I mean, you look at his place and it's opulent and it's gorgeous.
He's one of the landed elite, as they would have called them in older societies.
Yeah, and one of the big things that he has in common with Peter Parker is that they're both geniuses. But with him, and of course they're in different stages of life. He's not in high school.
And we always got the sense, though, that Miguel was always like, in that one scene we have with him, that he was in a rush to like join the system too, and that's why he has so much faith in it out of the costume, I think, and why he's not able to see through the faults in it as easy, because that's what he like based his whole life on trying to achieve,
Yeah, and yet it's gone too far, and he can't deal with the way that it's treating people now.
Exactly. Yeah. Because it. Because they were living in a small, what looked like a small apartment when his dad came home. Like he was.
I guess working. So. Yeah.
Yeah. So like they didn't have a lot of extra money. They were living in a small living space, but I bet they were doing kind of well. They had a computer in their house at least. So like in the 90s, like computers were just starting to become in houses. I don't know if he was writing this retroactively, like Miguel grew up in the 90s, but like clearly not, because
he couldn't have. It's 2099, yeah.
But I don't know. Like it's interesting, like thinking about all of those sorts of things.
Well, remember that this was 3 years before the internet hit big, and was 95 was really like the birth of people have internet in their homes at all. It wasn't until the late 90s that it was like that it became popular to the point where most people had that. So, and then early 2000s. So, I mean, like, it's when you're writing in 92, it's a little tough to predict all of that, to know exactly where all that's going. Exactly. I'm not real sure about the whole computer thing. I mean, like, now you look back at this and you're like, really? It's not even a flat screen monitor? Okay. But yeah, so I guess it is sort of hard to read that, but I think you're right. I think he does kind of get by just on his smarts to a point. But yeah, you're right. I mean, maybe it's just he's safer in that environment. He's been brought up to believe, and I mean, look what happened with his dad. He's been brought up to believe that that you're either going to step on the backs of everybody else and get up to the top, or you're gonna not make it at all.
Yeah, exactly. And I like that plays into the reason why he quips. He quips like Spider-Man.
Yeah.
But he does it for completely different reasons, and he does it out of the costume. He quips to like genuinely put people down. When Peter Parker quips at people, it's like kind of jokingly, and most people he's doing it to are like goofy supervillains that have really big egos, so it works and it's funny. But Miguel like genuinely puts people down, because I think he has this sort of inferiority thing. Like ever since his childhood, his father and his mother have been kind of putting him down. We see like this with his mother here, like even retroactively, like years later, she's like, Miguel, you're a terrible son, like you don't do enough for me and all of these things. She's kind of selfish about it in one way, but he could do more for her, but she acts very selfish about it when like she pretends to die in one scene, and apparently she does this all the time.
Wow, yeah.
For attention, and I was like,
crazy.
That's really selfish. She's not a very good person. So his parents kind of fostered this thing with him where it was like, that's the way you treat people, is you put them down. And that's supposed to strengthen them in the view of some people. I don't know. For Miguel, clearly it created a kind of negative outlook on people for him, where he doesn't have faith in anybody.
But then you look at the society
he's working with at Alchemex, besides Stone, even Stone, he puts him down all the time to his face.
Yeah, but then you look at and that was part of the difficulty reading this for me, I think, is that most of the people he puts down, I'm kind of with him. You know, like most of the time when he's mean to people, I'm sort of like, yeah, that guy totally deserved that, you know, or like a lot of the time you got like really ignorant, short-sighted people, and he's sitting here like, look at these horrible things we're doing to people, and you don't even realize it. And so yeah, you're right. Like he does have that outlook, but then I'm reading this book and I have that outlook, like with the society.
Right,
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's this really bleak future where one of the things that I do find myself wondering sometimes, and maybe it is all Dana, but we don't get enough time with them together, is I do sometimes wonder how, with his corporate mindset, he developed the kind of compassion for people that he does have, because that's of course the thing that we can relate to, and that makes him worthy to be Spider-Man. It's the thing that gets him to becoming, to a degree, to kind of becoming Spider-Man in the first place. Not getting the powers. By the way, I like the powers aren't just a total accident. That's the thing I really like. But and also that it's that the powers are a direct consequence of him of his just being mean to somebody.
Yeah.
So I'm glad that that's in there. So we do have the actions and consequences thing that Spider-Man's always been about. But yeah, he's like, I'm not 100% sure why he, of everybody in Alchemex, is the one person who's going, no, we're going too far, and will stand up to Stone. I don't think I quite have a fully drawn picture of him yet.
Yeah, me either. And it's interesting to see how that plays out, because he, like at the end of issue 10, when he's sort of having that internal conflict, he kind of doubts whether he really has that in himself or not, right?
Yeah.
But he's like, maybe Dana has more faith in me than she ought to. And of course, because this would be a complete downer if it ended like he didn't have any faith in people in reality, and he was just like a mindless corporate robot Spider-Man that killed people indiscriminately. That wouldn't be fun to read.
Yeah, because I don't know, Dan. Mindless corporate Spider-Man 2099. I don't think would be as good of a title for the book.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, like, you're thinking that's the way it's going to play out, but it'll be interesting to see in what way it plays out. These superhero things are often more about the journey rather than the destination. That's what I always say.
That's true, but I am questioning it. I am questioning how, you get even
definitely.
at the beginning of the book. I feel like this guy and I'm glad that he's at least questioning it and talking about it. So you're right. Maybe as we go along, we will understand that more. It is one of those books where there is a long-term plan. 10 issues in.
David's a long game playing writer. That's what he does.
We just got done seeing a lot of that with Simonson, so I feel like I'm in familiar territory here in that kind of storytelling. Because I'm 10 issues in, and I don't feel like I've read much past like a 2-hour pilot.
Yeah, that's a good point. This kind of does feel like the pilot for a Spider-Man 2099 like TV series or something like that.
And I'm not saying that it's too decompressed at all, because we need all of that world-building stuff. And I like that the world-building isn't just, okay, let's jump over to this other random place in the city and show you what that's like. We're always with him or with one of the major supporting characters. I feel like Peter David has a really good sense of how to use his setting. Setting is a big thing with this book. Setting is really important, and he is very naturally drawing this world for us through the events that are happening with Spider-Man, and not, like I said, just saying, okay, and then the slums are like this.
Yeah, exactly. And there's just so many things that I pick up on in the world, like we've talked about before. One of the other things that just popped in my head was like the global consolidation of corporations, and the fact that Tony Stark's company is owned by a Japanese company now, and they fight Alchemex and stuff. Like, it's interesting, like, seeing the legacy of Stark and Thor play out in ways where, like, they're just being used to enslave people. Like, even the Thor religious cult, like, there's someone just, like, telling these people that they need to dress up in Thor costumes and try to convert people to Thorism, like Jehovah's Witnesses, you know?
Yeah, the Thorites are scary. They don't get what Thor was about, really. And
yeah, exactly.
But you sympathize with them to a degree because they're grasping at straws looking for heroes, because the last period they heard about where there seemed to be such a thing as freedom, and where life seemed easier, and you didn't have to walk down the street afraid that you were going to get arrested for no reason, and all of that stuff, was this age of heroes. And there seems to be this direct correlation between. And I like, by the way, that the catastrophe with whatever happened with the heroes is left totally ambiguous. We have no idea what it was in this, and I think it's fleshed out somewhere in 2099 somewhere. But like here, it's just there was a horrible catastrophe. All the heroes are gone. We don't know what happened to Thor. I mean, I'm reading this whole thing and finding it very interesting that Thor's gone. Where is he? We don't know. I kind of like that. So one of the things I really enjoy about this too is that we see this future of the Marvel Universe without it using that as a crutch.
Yeah, exactly. Which is really interesting. Yeah, I just was really impressed with all of the. Like, this could have easily been a thing where Peter David was like, look at all of these cool, like, Marvel Universe things taken to, like, the future extent. Everything that he uses here is for the purpose of the story and the world that he wants to build. It's not like, oh, here's future Hulk for no reason, here's this for no reason. Like, he's very smart. Everything he uses in here is for some sort of purpose. It's very methodical. And when you try to pull it apart, you can see all of the working parts, but when you read it together, you feel like you're enveloped in this fully live and breathing world.
Yeah, and at the same time, while it's foreign and strange, and what Marvel stuff we're familiar with, as you said, he's integrated well into the story. He also uses that to make it familiar enough that we don't feel like we're in some completely other thing, and where it's not genericified. Because I've read the first few issues of X-Men 2099, and it feels very generic. It's been a long time since I've read that, so maybe it's different than I remember. But what I remembered was just a lot of very generic characters that I couldn't get invested in, and it didn't feel like the Marvel Universe. I read this and I'm like, okay, so if we had this like really bleak Marvel Universe, this is what it would be like. And I don't mean to keep hitting this point, but again, I think the part of why that's working so well is that there's a fundamental reason given for how it got this bad. It isn't just this very cynical, well, the future's going to be terrible. It's not, sorry, Gene Roddenberry, you're wrong, people can't get along. What we have here is you can't have peace without heroes. And so then you can't have not just peace, you can't have freedom without heroes. You have to have people setting examples so that people understand how to treat each other. And that's one of the points I wanted to make about the Thorites, was that they don't understand what heroism is. So they're just looking for a leader. They don't have a leader. They don't understand that. They don't have that kind of mentality. And so it's this horrible catch-22 where all of these people know they're being oppressed, but the only leadership they're getting are from these companies that keep doing all these horrible hostile takeovers. Like, that's all they have. So if they don't look to them, they're sunk. And so they have to live in these corporate dictatorships to even survive. And so they've been taught, and this really sad, horrible thing is they've been taught how to not think for themselves anymore. And so Miguel O'Hara, again, is in this very interesting, weird kind of like mid-range there, where he's been brought up learning how to not think for himself, and then at the same time, he can't help it, but he doesn't know what to do with that. And again, I don't entirely know where that comes from, but that's what I latch onto for his character. And that's where I think he really resonates for me.
I definitely agree.
Is when it's like human condition is, I want to have my freedom. I want to be allowed to think. The great They Might Be Giant song from John Henry, I should be allowed to think. He feels like he should be allowed to think, and he feels like people have the fundamental right to not be treated as objects.
Yeah, exactly. I completely agree with everything you just said, and like, it's interesting to see that sort of conflict play out, especially like we talked about in the relationships too. Like that's another aspect of it, where like, is he really thinking for himself in the humanity that he has in him too, because of Dana and her outlook on things. And I want to learn more about her.
Me too.
Because Stone in passing mentions that she works for a corporation too.
Yeah.
And it'll be interesting to see like two people from that class, corporate class people that work in the higher ups of the corporations, like what is up with their sort of why them of all people are the ones that are being freedom fighters, fighting from the top and sticking up for the people at the bottom. I mean, obviously those are the kind of the heroes, the people that we need, but I want to see why she specifically would influence Miguel and vice versa. And Stone, like you said, is another character I want to see fleshed out more, because he does terrible things, but he's one of those guys. He's got that corporate mindset where any and all ends are justified by the means, or the other way around.
Yeah.
All means, like he no holds barred. Like he wants to make this like underwater civilization or theme park for people, and like presumably he wants to make life better for people, but he's doing like terrible things to achieve these goals, and there happens to be a huge kickback in his favor out of it.
Well, exactly,
you know?
Yeah. Does he really care anything about making life better for people, or does he know that's going to sell, and so he can he can help try to put Stark out of business, and that sort of thing. I mentioned Batman Beyond. I think that that show and this do a lot of the same things in order to make this future thing feel not as gimmicky as it could be. And I think that is the big criticism that 2099 on a whole got a lot, was, okay, it's just Marvel in the future, but what's it really about? What are you really saying with it? Are you just being novel with it? And Peter David was the one that, I mean, I haven't read all of that, but I mean, like Peter David's was the one where he was like, let's really be thoughtful about it and try to actually like say what might the future be like if certain things happen. Let's do a real what if story, and let's make it still feel like Marvel. And that's a thing that Batman Beyond managed too, which is why, even though a lot of people thought that show wouldn't work because it was just future Batman, here's our gimmick, the big thing that they both get right, and we were talking about this a little bit earlier, is that they try to create their own world out of what came before and not just rely on what was there already. So like, I'm reminded when I look at things like the future Vulture, and I look at things like where the corporations went, Stark, and then looking at the Thorites and things like that, I'm reminded of things like the Joker's gang in Batman Beyond, where it's like, okay, we're not gonna like ride on the coattails of the Joker. We're gonna say, hey, he influenced things, and here was the result of that. And you have a lot of that with this too. But other things just kind of haphazardly and superficially that this and Batman Beyond have in common. Both have a girlfriend named Dana. That's weird.
I didn't realize that. That's funny.
Kind of odd. I don't know how that happened, and of course, I want to know how much this influenced Batman Beyond, because that was about 5 years after this, I think, 5 or 6. So like, this predates Batman Beyond by quite a few years. That was late '90s. So that's really kind of interesting to me. It's about all the same sorts of things. Corporations running people being apathetic and not thinking for themselves. It's about all of those same sorts of things. People being oppressed and not even hardly realizing it, and just like people losing their humanity to a system. These two things are all about that. This is scarier by a long shot, and because Beyond. I felt like Beyond is maybe like the middle of the road between what we have now and this future, where it's like they're headed there, and if Powers takes over Wayne Enterprises, and he does that, but like when Powers takes over Wayne Enterprises at the beginning of the show, maybe we're getting closer and closer to this, but then before that it wasn't so bad, that kind of thing. But then all of like the genetic engineering stuff is there, the drug stuff is there, like, so like here you have Rapture, there you had this. You had splicing. So I mean, like they have a lot of they have a lot of things in common there, and some of it is just kind of the natural conclusion of, if you're going to do a somewhat dystopian corporate-run future, what would it look like? So it makes a lot of sense that they have the same things. But I want to know how much Bruce Timm looked at this. I want to know if he looked at it at all, or if they just happened to go to some of the same things, because I'm looking at this, and Batman Beyond feels a little derivative here and there. Interesting that this and the animated series started in exactly the same year. And so, like, this was, if you look at Batman Beyond, it feels a little ahead of its time, but then you got to wonder, how much of that was actually borrowed from that. Another thing I thought was very funny that I want to tack on, since I just mentioned the whole drug thing, is there's a billboard in here that says, say no to plugs. Which just cracked me the heck up. 1992, Dare was a huge thing at that point. Early 90s was all about hey kids, say no to drugs, and I thought it was really funny that they put that in there. And you got to wonder what exactly they're talking about. What is there like a drug induced jacking into the Matrix thing that happens in this universe? Like, what's happening? So anyway, I thought that was pretty hysterical.
Yeah, and it would be interesting, like you said, to see if this did influence it, because like a lot of people say Terry McGinnis feels like a Spider-Man-esque kind of character in a lot of ways. And this is definitely, I think, a little bit, darker than Spider-Man usually is, so it's probably got some influence from some of the darker things like Batman and Daredevil and stuff.
And ironically, it's darker than Batman Beyond.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to bring up the character thing of Miguel, like, killing people and not really feeling anything about it, which is interesting. Like, he carelessly, like, kills two villains here, one on purpose and one completely by accident. And he doesn't really even know how to feel, like, if those human lives are worth anything, even though they're such, like, either corporate tools or just evil people in the case of the Vulture. That's another facet of that kind of character thing that we were speaking about before that I think plays in and is really interesting. Because, like, he put the Spider-Man costume on, and we talked a lot about how he wants to be this freedom fighter and stick up for the people. Well, how much of a freedom fighter can he really be if he, like, takes human lives and even if they're bad people, he doesn't see any value in them? What if his perception gets perverted like everyone else's has, and he's fighting for a cause that's not right, and he doesn't see value in the lives of the right people, and that's where I think that conflict comes from as well.
Yeah, I mean, the problem that we have here is that whoever is the most powerful makes up all the rules, so we don't have due process. And so if you are trying to fight against that system and you are one man and you make all the choices for everybody, you're not any better than they are.
Yeah, I mean, there's a point in here where someone's criminal record is purchased by Alchemex, and they are just thrown indiscriminately into a prison, which is completely scary.
Yeah, no, there's some terrifying in this, and I do think that it would be easy to accidentally overlook what the book is actually about, and some of the scary implications, the social commentary, because of some of the goofy stuff. Because the way people talk in this is very late 80s, early 90s comic book. Sometimes we had more kind of serious, sophisticated writing. This is that kind of mainstream comic book thing that we had at that time, which was what I'm used to, and I have no problem reading it. We talked about this when we did Death of Superman, Dan, where it is like, it's melodramatic fiction that is about stuff and where you actually care about people. So the way it's presented is as melodrama, but then when you actually deconstruct it, it's not. And that's kind of what this is, I think. And so, there's a lot of places.
Spider-Man has always been.
Well, that's a really good point. Yeah, and there's a lot of places in this where I'm like, nobody would ever say that. Even in this future, there's no way anybody would say that. And just is super goofy stuff. I don't like where a suit comes from. I couldn't get my mind around that. I thought that was really goofy. There's things like that where it would be really easy to not even think about the terrifying implications of things because there's just weirdness. But yeah, so he bought this suit to go to the Day of the Dead festival, and then it just happens to be this material that can't be destroyed because it's what do they call it, Dan? It's like
it's the unstable molecules. Reed Richards invention.
Unstable molecules. Yeah. Well, why did that suit have unstable molecules? I don't
know. The one thing I did like about the Day of the Dead thing is that it speaks to the fact that the society doesn't value human life anymore.
Oh, okay.
And that he talks about how the Day of the Dead stuff is just all partying. Nobody really pays attention much know what the holiday's about anymore, which is it was an ancient, like, I think a Mexican tradition, like, and they would, take this day and celebrate the people they had lost, and everyone just goes out and drinks now and parties, and he's like, oh yeah, some of the parties were rough and stuff like that. So just speaking more to and building this society that's just like, death isn't even like a point of grievance to them anymore.
We're so dehumanized. I would be fascinated to see what their what their traditions regarding death are. Like how do they deal with funerals and things?
Well, we did see one thing with Stone in here where he got his son's ashes and flushed them down the toilet.
Oh, you're right, we did, and that was scary. But see, that's the problem sometimes in this, though, is that this kind of, it's hard not to get out of the mindset of, I'm used to seeing evil corporate CEOs doing terrible things. So sometimes I look at that, and I'm glad you reminded me of that, because, you look at that, and you don't immediately think, oh my God, that's what the society is like. You think, okay, that's what bad guys in the society are like,
Right.
And, but it is, because he is also a product of his society, and the saddest and scariest thing, of course, is that he is the epitome of the best kind of person you can be in the society. Like, he's what everybody strives to be, and he is what Miguel at one point strove to be, and is starting to rethink that. I mean, you wouldn't want to be this guy.
No, you wouldn't. I mean, he sees that his son died, and he said basically he wasn't useful to me anyway. I don't really care about him.
And then he just says, "Put flowers in it" or something. I was like, "Oh my God!"
Yeah, exactly. He's make it useful. That's what you talked about before, like everyone being part of a machine and not being humans.
There's a lot of Metropolis,
like not having any use other than their labor and what they're able to do to the collective whole of the corporation. So,
and I was also reminded of Metropolis with the whole very literal, the people at the bottom are on the bottom and the people at the top are on the top. They live above everything.
Giant wealth inequality between the two of them.
The whole notion of the vulture is on the bottom, and he, with his wings, rises to the top to show people how messed up the world really is. That was an image that I liked and really spoke to me. I mean, he's a crazy, insane character, but it sort of has that. I don't want to give it too much credit, but it does sort of have that Joker kind of thing of insanity is really clarity.
Yeah. I mean, he was able to see through the hypocrisy that's blatant to us as readers that the main character wasn't able to see, and he has no discrepancy about who he is either. I mean, he's like, I was raised in this world where we don't value human life at all. I eat people, and I like it, and I'm fully aware of the fact that I do it, and I will admit it to people. And my cult actually likes me for doing this because I take our enemies and dispose of them in this way.
Because he doesn't just eat anyone. He cannibalizes people that he deems not worthy to be called humans. So like he was created that way by the society. It's almost like, look, you deserve it. You made me. And I feel like the Joker is kind of like that too, especially look at like Heath Ledger Joker, where it's like you think you're civilized but you're not. It's the very same sort of thing, I think, and yet it's different too. Like he's not that exact character, but I think those ideas are there.
Yeah, it'll be very interesting to see too. Like on the villain side, there was a brief sort of mention and panel appearance by Dr. Doom.
Yeah.
And I'm not familiar what's up with that version of the character, so after I say what I'm going to say about this, inform me if I'm wrong about anything. But if that's the original Dr. Doom, it'll be very interesting to see what his place is in this new world, because he's very much part of the old guard of rulership. Like even in the current Marvel universe today, he lives in a castle and he's the king of a fictional country. Like that doesn't even happen today anymore. And it'll be very interesting to see like if Peter David is able to parallel that with like these corporations. Are they just the same thing as kings with a different name? Are there differences between the two of them, government versus the private sector of business? All of that sort of thing will be very interesting to see if he does anything with that, if Doom is still a king and the ruler of Latveria.
I'm sure it is no accident that Dr. Doom is brought into this story of all things, and it would be cool down the, and it is the original Doom, by the way, and I think it
Okay.
And I think it'll be interesting, Dan, down the line, if you can get your hands on it, to also review Doom 2099, because
cool.
it had a fairly long running series too. I think it was several. It wasn't as many as this, but I think it ran for at least half of this, maybe less. I'm not sure, but it was around. But yeah, I remember that was the only other 2099 thing I remember kind of liking. So
I love Doctor Doom, so
I hope that he factors into this in a major way at some point, because 10 issues in, I was surprised not to see him pop back up yet, and because we've only got 46 issues, and so I hope that wasn't just his introduction so that he could get his own series. I hope he actually deals with Spider-Man.
Me too. And like he says in the panels, like Doctor Doom shows up in a very early issue of Amazing Spider-Man and fights him, so it's kind of in the tradition, which is cool, to see him fight the new Spider-Man, and he views this Spider-Man as a response to the fact that he kind of still exists too. And that's kind of like, what the Joker and Batman talk about all the time is the escalation. A society creates some form of oppression or rebellion, and another force rises to fight it just naturally, like someone's going to come out of the society. And I like that idea too. I think that's a thing that's interesting about a society in a way that, like, we talked a lot about how this society's treated people like cogs in a machine. Like, how much are they really, though, if there's like this escalation where the society organically responds to each other and has these forces that go against each other? It's an interesting question.
Well, I think what it is ultimately is that it's oversimplification from the possibly from both parties, right? Where it's like, the oppressive government or corporation, or in this case, kind of both, right? The same thing. They look at people as cogs in a machine because A, it makes it easier for them as individuals to sleep better at night, and B, they that's what they want it to be, and so they keep pretending that's what it is, hoping it will become that. But we have not completely dehumanized these people yet. We're getting there. They're almost there. But I think Miguel is supposed to represent what all of these people still have the capacity to be, if only they will open their eyes and see and see past the bleak despair.
Right, exactly. And we see kind of a Batman Begins-esque thing in here where, like, almost immediately people see Spider-Man as a symbol of hope and, like, dress up as him and try to imitate him and do similar things to him, which I really like.
I like that a lot.
Because, like you said, this capacity to rebel against an oppressive force and fight for their freedom and be free people is within all of them. They were just looking, like you said, for a leader to show them the way, which doesn't really change their situation a whole lot. But in this case, because we're in a fictional story where this character we know he's a good person, they're following the right guy, I guess, but they're still,
but they don't realize that,
following an authority figure.
It's right? Blind, and it's kind of scary. There's a book I read recently that I keep meaning to do a vault on that I haven't done yet, called Silver Surfer Parable. Have you ever read that?
I think I've heard of it, but I've never checked it out.
It's written by Stan Lee and drawn by Mobius, and
yes, I have seen that. I haven't read it though. I've heard it's great,
and it's about the very same kind of notion where Silver, where like you've got these like worshippers of. You got these kind of like cult worshippers that are kind of worshiping Galactus until they find out what Galactus really is, if memory serves. And then at the end of it, they try to replace that blind authority figure with Silver Surfer, and Silver Surfer has been trying to teach them how to not be that way, and they've learned nothing by the end. And this book I think has that very same thing where they're like, well, we worship Thor, but then you must be like the acolyte of Thor, you must be like the emissary of Thor, and so they start looking to him. Why are they looking to him? What exactly has he been doing that even necessarily is in their interest? I get he's going against the big corporation. I'm not even sure how they know exactly what he's doing. I think it is as simple as he's wearing a costume and fighting people that are oppressing us. I think it's that simple, and that's kind of scary because they look back to the heroic age and they go, we need that again. But again, if you don't understand those principles, that's incredibly dangerous, because somebody like Dr. Doom could show up and you might follow that guy.
Yeah, and I think it was as simple as one of the Thor acolytes said, like, Spider-Man used to be a friend of Thor, so therefore, if Spider-Man came back, he must be the emissary of the return of all of the superheroes. Which, it's kind of like some of the people that are ultra-religious zealots, where they have this book, and no matter what religion it is, and something that's they vaguely related to a position that they want to hold. They'll be like, oh, this one thing justifies what I want to do, and they become militant about it or whatever, or like, fight for a social cause, whatever, in good or bad interest. In any case, it's sort of like that. That's the kind of vibe I was getting from it, which I found to be sort of interesting.
Yeah, so you can validate anything just through interpretation. And I mean, like, what they're not thinking of, and where they're kind of out to lunch, is, well, Spider-Man was just a regular guy. He died. It's been 100 years. He had to have died, or he's in a wheelchair and he's really old. You know what I mean? So, they're thinking, oh man, they were all gods. They have no perspective. They're completely clueless. Let's switch gears for a second. What did you think of the look of this book?
I liked Rick Leonardi's art in this. It's very distinctly from the time. You can tell it was drawn in the 90s, but I don't think it's the sort of bad 90s artwork where it's just all splash pages. The anatomy isn't terrible. It's definitely got a little bit of 90s anatomy going on, especially if you look at the feet on the cover here. They're very strange looking, but I think it fits the aesthetic of the world here. I think this is attempting to be over the top, even though we've seen some of our own world 20 years later in this book. Yeah. I think it sort of fits the tone and the aesthetic that Peter David was going for when he was writing this, at the very least.
I find what you said very offensive, because my feet look exactly like that. So, you can't usually see them on camera. But that's actually what my feet look like. So I don't know, man. Maybe you just have different feet.
You've got the Liefeld gene.
I do. I got the if I had the Liefeld gene, I just wouldn't have feet. No, I love this costume design.
Me too.
It is one of my favorites, and I've always said I really like Spider-Man 99. I haven't read a lot of it. I can't call myself a big fan of this. This is the most I've ever read of this. I think I've read the first 3 or 4 issues several times and then never went any farther. And I've read we'll do this later. I've read the team up, the Spider-Man 2099 regular Spider-Man team up, which is, by the way, pretty cool. It's been a while since I've read it. The art in that is really good. But anyway, so I don't know. I really dig Spider-Man 2099's different power set. I like that he has claws instead of regular, just being able to walk up walls and stuff. It's a little edgier. It's a little scarier. I think it goes a lot with what kind of a character he is versus Peter Parker, where he's not just walking up walls, he's clawing his way up, I like that we have that. This is the first instance of organic webbing I can recall ever reading about.
Yes, I believe that is true.
I'm not saying it's the only one, it's the first time it was ever done, but it's the first one I ever read.
The symbiote webbing is technically organic because he had the costume on, but this is the first time it's ever been built into Spider-Man's physiology, I think, when he gets his powers.
It's a little bit kooky that it comes out the same way and that it comes from the same place where Peter Parker just decided to put it. I do like that he kind of makes fun of that in saying, well, it could have come from my rump, and I'm glad that it didn't come from there. But still, it is pretty goofy that that's where it comes from.
It is, yeah, I agree. And, whenever they do that, if they retconned that during the other during JMS's run, and Spider-Man died and was reborn and got the organic web shears, and it was really goofy then too. But I think at least here it's less goofy than that. And I do like that it's interesting, the Peter Parker thing, how his web shears fail him and at the worst times. I like that here it's as simple as you squeeze his arm and the webbing comes out, so you have all these situations where he's trying to keep his identity safe from Stone, and at one point someone squeezes his arm right next to him and webbing goes all over the floor, and he's like, don't look down, don't look down, don't look down, It's funny.
Something I think is interesting too is that he doesn't do a lot of web slinging.
He doesn't, no.
He leaps a lot. This guy just jumps. He's like the Tick. He just jumps, building the building all the time. And if memory serves, it was kind of like that a little bit in Shattered Dimensions too, where like
they totally did the free falling thing too that happens in the first issue, which I thought was awesome.
Yeah, it was awesome. Yeah, so I mean, like, I'm reading this and I'm like, wow, they really did their homework when they made that video game, because I really felt like I was playing this character, and like reading this, I felt like, oh yeah, they got all that stuff right.
No, I agree. That was one of the best Spider-Man games in a long time when that came out. I loved that game.
And has that is directly affected people's kind of the resurgence of this character and people's newfound interest in him. You think Spider-Man 2099 is kind of back, or is this like a thing that's gonna I guess this is as good a place to talk about this as any, since this is the reason that we're doing this series. Do you think that this is got any staying power? I mean, I don't know that this book is gonna last a long time, but I just mean, like, this character, like is he back for a little bit, or is it gonna be like Resurrection Man, where it's just, yeah, we brought it back for a second?
I think the fact that he has the Spider-Man brand on him helps a lot in that regard.
It's a really good point.
But I don't think the taste for alternate Spider-Mans will ever go away. I mean, like, look at how long Ultimate's been going, and like they killed that version of Peter Parker, gave us a new one, and that one's doing gangbusters still. So I think as long as this is good and it like finds an audience, and especially the current comic market where it's getting bigger, we're getting more readership and stuff like that. And the fact that he's made his way into like other media, I think he's gonna become a fabric of the Spider-Man canon and universe, hopefully, because I like this character a lot.
Yeah, I am floored that it took this long. Because Shattered Dimensions was 4 years ago, and if memory serves, it was 10, I think, and it did gangbusters, and people loved it, and the thing they all talked about was 2099. I think that game introduced a lot of people to this character. I think a lot of people did not know that he even existed. And did Peter David write that game?
Oh, that was Dan Slott. Peter David did the sequel called Edge of Time.
Oh, okay.
Which is and Edge of Time is fantastic. We can talk about that another time.
I've not played it.
Peter Parker and Spider-Man 2099 as dual protagonists in the game. It's fantastic.
Okay, awesome. So I mean, and then they did a sequel. So how did it take this long? Like even just bringing 2099 back into continuity took a long time. So I don't know. I'm somewhat surprised by that. But yeah, I don't know. I'm excited that it's back. And like I said, I've read this and it's quite good. And I'm not going to review it here. I've got another show for that. But yeah, so I don't know. I'm glad it's back. I will say, for folks that might be wondering, read this. Read at least the first trade of this before you read this. I'm not saying this isn't accessible, but this is majorly an extension of this, and you'll appreciate a lot better, because, like, I read these in the same day. I read all 10 of these, and then I went ahead and read this, and I went, oh my goodness, this is so much more interesting than it would have been had I not done that.
Yeah, I feel like if you don't have the background on the world that this guy comes from, I feel like he would be a lot harder to get a handle on as a character in present day, you know what I mean? And that's the kind I haven't read the first issue of the series yet, but that's one of the things that I think, honestly, I might miss about having him in present day, because I found this world to be so interesting. But it'll also at the same time be interesting to see how him set in our present day and the parallels that we see in our own lives with this series from 1994, him dealing with that stuff and trying to prevent it from becoming as bad as it is in here, with how things have gotten today. That will be interesting.
Yeah. Well, without giving anything away at all, I'm going to be very cryptic when I say this. The world is not... The world that we have here is not absent here.
Oh, interesting.
I mean, this is set in present day, but David, at least in the first issue, finds a really interesting way to still kind of bring some of that in. That's all I'm going to say.
And I do really like, this isn't spoilers for the first issue, because they did this at the end of the Superior. Alchemex bought out Oscorp, and they're a big conglomerate now.
Yeah,
so you can see the seeds of that world kind of happening, which is interesting.
Well, and it's the whole reason that Slott brought 2099 in the first place. I think that he came up with that whole Alchemex thing to give a reason for 2099 to come back to specifically that period, and it makes a lot more sense than if it was just arbitrary. So it's sort of like, this is the beginnings of Alchemex, and that's why he's here to stop certain things from happening.
It's very. We're kind of talking about what could be interesting in the current series now.
No, that's all right. Yeah.
before we do anything else, how interesting is it that we have Peter Parker in a place where he's running a major big corporation, and Miguel comes back and sees the guy that he's based his whole career on being part of a corporation? That's really interesting.
Yep, that is cool. I think it might be a little bit more interesting if Peter Parker had actually come up with that idea on his own. But yeah, no, you're right. Anything else about this we should mention before we go? We've talked longer than I thought we would, and we have at least four more videos to make. So obviously we'll be talking more about this. But anything else about these 10 that we need to bring up?
Nothing that I can think of. I thoroughly enjoyed this series.
I did too.
I liked it a lot when I finished reading it, and as we got talking about it, I think I liked it much more even discussing with you. And when we were talking before we started recording, I told you, I was like, I really enjoyed this. This was really fun. And I think this is, talking it through with you like we often do, my opinion changes a little bit for better or for worse. I think it was for better in this situation. I really enjoyed this. Peter David is such a smart writer.
Yeah.
Like, whenever I see him do anything, I'm just like, man, this is the reason why I love this guy so much. And man, he's in full form here. This is classic Peter David stuff, playing a long game, doing interesting stuff with these characters. And that's what I've always loved about Peter David, is always grounded in character, and it's definitely here. Not as much as some of his other stuff, because it's a lot about world building at the beginning. So if I'd say, like you said, read the first trade and you'll get to the good Peter David characterizations, but it takes just a little while. I'd highly recommend it to people.
I think in this case it had to be that way because
exactly. Yeah.
we are sort of like when we were talking about Thor, where you're dealing with a very different kind of society and a different set of values and ideas of ethics and just how people should behave. You've got to understand all of that kind of dehumanization stuff before you can even really get a grip on who this guy is. Because, I think Peter David is taking a big risk in making the world so very different, because he's got to make this guy, he's got to make you understand how that world is that way. He's got to make you believe it, but then he's also got to make this guy sympathetic with the sort of values that he can't help but have, and that the book itself believes is detestable.
Yeah, exactly.
It's
a very big risk.
So the world itself is a character, in that sort of way. And now that we've lived in it for a little bit, it's looking, it gets a lot more involved in the last 3 or 4 issues, in relationship stuff and in character stuff, like you were talking about.
Yeah, it would have been interesting reading this month to month. I'm not sure that I would have been as engaged in it month to month because I talked a lot about when we were reviewing Ultimate. That, granted, took much longer than this in getting Miles Morales to have a girlfriend and relationships and have to get the Spider-Man stuff that I kind of going. But if you were reading this month to month, if you read the first issue, would you have kept buying this month to month? I wonder if I would have in the 90s. I'm not sure that I would have.
Well, like I said, I've owned all of this for a long time, and I've read the first couple issues several times and never felt the need to continue. It didn't grab me right off, and I think I needed to read this much of it in one sitting before it really grabbed me. I'm not saying that I wasn't interested, especially this time, but I think part of it's just because this character has been popping up some lately, so I'm more curious now. But I don't know. I think it was perhaps a slight misstep to not. And it's crazy I'm saying this because I usually advocate just linear storytelling. This is a case where I almost wonder if we shouldn't have had a brief adventure with this character to kind of flesh the world out a little bit and then go back and do his origin instead of starting with his origin, because the exciting stuff that really keeps you going is when he's in costume and he's fighting the man. That's what you're really here for. And so it opens with that for 2 or 3 pages, and I think Peter David was thinking exactly what I am at the beginning is, well, we've got this on the cover, we better give you that somewhere in the first issue or they're not going to keep buying it. So, but isn't it really jarring? There's nothing after that first scene to denote that it was later. There's nothing to denote that so you turn the page and when you see Miguel O'Hara there, you think that he's actually been Spider-Man, and then like you're like, oh wait, no, this is before all that. It takes a little while before you get there. I'm wondering if maybe he shouldn't have done what he did with the first 3 pages, but spread it out over 2 issues and like tell a story, but be like, okay, throw us in the middle of everything. Okay, I hit Alchemax and I'm fighting against it and stuff, and then but make it. I don't mean like make it the beginning of a story that we're gonna go back and then go forward to, but make it a one and done story that could be set at any time during his career at all whatsoever. Just a very one and done kind of by itself sort of thing, and then go back and start the long form storytelling thing and just use that as a way to get us in here. That's maybe my biggest criticism is I don't know that I'm hooked until like issue 4 or 5.
Yeah, I agree. Because, like I said, I read the first 3 issues just as the origin, because it says, like, the origin concludes in issue 3. It says it in big letters at the top here. So I was like, oh, I'll read those, see, like, how the series is, if I like it. And, I'm the same way. I read those first 3 and didn't really continue. One other thing that I thought of that character-wise that I thought was really interesting is the AI. I completely forgot to talk about her.
Oh, we didn't even talk about her. Lila.
She is really interesting because she has so many eerie similarities to all the people that Miguel interacts with, and she's just as easy to control as those people. It's very scary. Like, you look at her and she like has this programming, and in other situations, like Miguel tells her in one situation, some excuse for the fact that he left to be Spider-Man to someone, and she keeps doing it over and over again when someone asks about him, and she even says like, "Oh, good girl" at the end, because that's what Miguel said, and that's just like how the people behave in the society too. And Miguel's so used to dealing with her like a real person, because that's how everyone else is. He like has conversations with her and stuff.
But she's clearly not actually a self-aware character.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no, you're right, and everybody kind of acts like they're programmed, and they're sort of the parrot talk is how I would describe it. I didn't latch on to that like you did, and I think you're absolutely right about that. She's more interesting now that you say that. Well, anyway, everybody, thanks always for watching. We sure appreciate it. We will be back with you with the next 10 issues of Spider-Man 2099 here very soon. Dan, thanks for joining me. I'm so glad we're doing this. This is fun.
No problem. I was glad to finally get to doing some Spider-Man stuff on Vaults, because that's what we love.
So I know, yeah, Spider-Dan. Well, the other thing that's nice about this, too, is that, like, with Thor, you knew all that, but this, you and I are both in uncharted territory.
That's true.
We've each read a little bit of this, but we're now both to the point where we have no idea what's coming.
Yeah, exactly. I can't wait to see what Peter David has in store for me, because I've read through, like, some of his other runs, like on, Spectacular Spider-Man and Hulk. And he takes the characters to some really down and dark places before he brings them up. So we'll see.
Thanks again for watching. We appreciate it. I'm Captain Logan.
And I'm Dan.
And we'll see you next time.